There we go. All right. So this is our first family history interview. If you want to tell me your name and tell me your parents' names.
Brenda Darlene Wilson Hassell, daughter of Harry LaVon Wilson and Evelyn Lura Wright Wilson.
All right. And if you want to, kind of start telling me some of your earliest memories from your life. Tell me about your
Well,
siblings and
well, I have a recording. I guess the earliest would be actually what I thought was a nightmare, um, where I saw a child in a cage and they couldn't get out, and I was watching the child. And I mentioned it to my sister Cookie on one of our beach trips, and she said that that was me in the crib, that I kept trying to get out during the night, and that my dad had put a screen door on top of the crib so that I couldn't get out. So I guess that's my earliest memory. After that, I remember living in Sandy Point, and just outside of Bridgeton, North Carolina, and um, remember a lot of friendships in the neighborhood. We lived in a neighborhood that had a field, a large field, um, with houses all around the field. And those were the kids that I played with, most of them members of the church. But we played quite a bit together and got into trouble together, and get on our bikes and ride down to the river, which was pretty close, a block away, and get on the same bikes and ride down to the swampy area, which was, I can't remember the name of the creek. I thought it was Dawson's Creek, but it's not. But that's pretty much what I remember. We had one small house. I think it had two bedrooms in it, one bathroom, with Cookie, David, Ben, me, and Chris, and Mom and Dad. And we lived there until I was about 7 years old. And then we moved to Old Vanceboro Road, um, in Bridgeton, and lived there until I was about 11 or 12. And then we moved to Jacksonville, North Carolina, where we lived, or I lived until I was 18. And I married and moved to Winston-Salem. And I have lived here for 57 years. So
I
that's
didn't
my,
realize the old Vanceboro Road. I didn't realize that you lived over there near where Aunt Cookie lived.
yeah. Yeah, we lived there from the time I was about 8 or 9 until I was 11 or 12. Yep.
Yeah,
And
I had
that,
always heard the Bridgeton thing, but I never tied the two of them together as far as being on that same road.
well, the first house we lived in when we moved to New Bern on the Bridgeton side of the river was on Antioch Road. And then from there, we moved to Sandy Point and then to Old Vanceboro Road in Bridgeton. So,
All right. What do you remember about your grandparents on either side?
well, Granny Wright and Grandpa Wright. I remember being at their home, and all the furniture in the living room was covered in plastic so that it couldn't be damaged. I remember when my grandmother um, would watch me, she would sit me in a chair in the kitchen right by the countertop and wouldn't let me get down, so that she could cook or do what she needed to in the kitchen. My grandpa, there was a little kitchenette just off from the kitchen. I considered it a small back porch because the back door entry was right there. And it had um, an old, it wasn't old, it was new at the time, a metal table with four chairs and a TV, small TV. And Grandpa would sit out there every morning with his newspaper and his cigarettes and that TV and that forever cough that he had trying to clear his throat, I guess, from smoking cigarettes. And that's where I would sit and we would talk about fishing because he loved to fish. And I don't recall, I think they came to visit us one time in Jacksonville, but other than that, I don't think they ever came to our house. I remember running around and playing when Mom and Dad were there to watch us. Most often, we would run from Granny's house down to Aunt Jerusha's house, my grandmother's sister, because she always had candy and goodies for kids, and she allowed us to do pretty much what we wanted to. But that's what I remember about my mom's family. My dad's family, my goodness, we went there more often, and um, we we would stay the night at my grandmother's, but we would visit everybody while we're there. They didn't come to Granny's to visit us. We just kind of bounced around to try to visit everybody while we were there. I remember going and spending the summer with my grandmother, and it was quite interesting because she didn't have a car. I wanted to go places. And one time she did stop the bus out in front of her house, and we got on the bus and went to town. But that's the only time I can ever remember going anywhere with her. A couple of my cousins lived just down the road from her, and I would play with them. Other than that, I don't remember a whole lot about my Granny Wilson. She was fussy, but old people are. I've gotten that way in my old age.
Now, you guys took a trip out to Salt Lake or Arizona together at one point with Granny, didn't you?
There was one trip that we took to California, and we visited family along the way in Alabama, Arizona, and then my brother in California. But the time that you're talking about going to Utah was the day that I was married in New Bern, and Mom and Dad, Nancy, Betty, Lee, and Granny took off and went to Utah to be sealed together, and I couldn't go. So, I mean, it was my wedding day, and Jim had to be at work on Monday. So he was in the police academy, and we weren't able to go for that.
Now, I recall at one point you telling me that whenever you went to Arizona, that you met with family out there. Do you remember the names?
Bone,
Um,
the Bone family out there.
was it
Bone and Busby.
Busby? That's do you recognize the name Letty Colvin?
Oh, yeah, I
You
do. I
remember
remember
getting
at her house, I remember, I guess the most unique thing I remember about her house is that she had some kind of contraption. It reminded me of a lot of Dad's inventions. She had a fan in the window that looked like it was very unusual. It had a blower on it and cool water running past it in the by the blower to keep the house cool because it was so hot. But I don't remember a whole lot. I think it was probably maybe 11 or 12 when we went out there, and don't remember much more than that.
she is one of the few uh, that really, really got into the family history. Some of the best information that we have comes from her.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember her giving Dad a satchel with
mhm.
a bunch of family history, a bunch of genealogy in it. Of course, we all got excited about that, but and I have looked through it since when I had it. When before Dad died, he gave it to me, and I don't. Did I give it to you?
I'm pretty sure I've got it here
Yeah,
along with everything else.
yeah.
Letty was the daughter of Sally.
Wow,
So it was Eddie Wilson's niece. And one of the cool things is we actually have a document from her, a letter or kind of a family history that she wrote where she talked about when they moved out to Arizona, when they left Georgetown, sold everything they had, and moved to Arizona. And we had never realized this. They hopped on the train. It was in April of 01, 1901, and they hopped on the train to go to Columbia, South Carolina, to visit Psyche, which would be her grandmother, because they knew they'd probably never see her again because they were moving to Arizona. And whenever they were on their way there, Eddie Wilson, your grandfather, was a baggage man on the train and kind of surprised them. They didn't realize that's what he was doing. And he found out they were moving to Arizona and he quit his job right then and joined them and went to Arizona with them.
that sounds like a Wilson.
Yeah. And so they got there in April of '01, and then Sally died 2 months later in June of '01. So we assume that's about the time that Eddie packed his stuff and came back east. But until we found that letter, we had never realized that he had moved with them temporarily. It kind of gave some insight into his travels, which,
Yeah,
as you know, was all over the place.
yeah, it was. Yeah, he took Dad with him quite a few places. Um, I recall Dad talking about that and how they would go door to door trying to find work to fix clocks or washing machines or whatever needed to be repaired for food. They would work for food, and they met a lot of different people in different circumstances, and probably got into a lot of stuff they shouldn't have. But
I think one of the stories that came from either Granny or Cecil is he was referred to as a snake oil salesman, which I always wondered, because they called him Doc Wilson
yeah,
because he was selling medicines. But as we know, the medicines weren't actually medicinal all the time. And so hearing it
yeah,
referred to as snake oil, I had to kind of look that up and realize what they meant by it.
yeah. They had a lot of good stories. I think probably missed a lot of them by not talking. I've told my kids if there's anything they want to know or any questions they have, they need to ask them now before my mind can't recall things. So I'm glad you're doing this now, Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is just an extension of, 20 years ago, you telling me to take on the family history. And
Yeah,
it's just a natural progression, keeping on gathering the information and passing it on to that next generation, especially, I mean, for my own kids, you know.
yeah, yeah.
But what other memories do you have, like attending family reunions? I know one of the biggest ones ever was the one that Mike Culver hosted in Cheraw, which we kind of, piggybacked off of and duplicated back in 2012 at the same location. But I mean, family reunions were always grandma's thing. And I'm curious, what are some of the other ones going to Granny Wilson's birthday? I have you on video from there with a lot of the kids when they were like really young. What are some of your memories of some of the other family members from events like that?
Well, I know that every year they would say, you better come to the reunion. Granny may not be here next year. She's 82 years old. And I think she lived to be what, 97? So every year, all those in attendance were afraid that she might not be around the next year. So they would come. And they had incentives like gifts for the one that traveled the furthest, the ones that had the most kids, the one that, of course, the oldest. Um, the one that had been married the long, they would have different things for different gifts. That was one thing. But just every year it seemed that there were people there that we had not met before that we didn't know about. And I think that was the draw for me, is to meet new people. And of course, Mom, there was never a stranger that in her in her mind, she was friends with everybody. If you met her, it was like you had known her for 15 or 20 years, because she had something to talk about with everybody. But I don't remember a whole lot, just running around and playing when I was small. But then as I got older and had kids of my own, uh, a lot of the things that I got into as a kid, I would make sure I kept my eye on my kids so they wouldn't get into the same mess that I did. Um, because we were allowed to run around and really not any supervision at all, do what we want to. I've got a lot of stories recorded from Cookie and David about growing up, different times and experiences they had, which they're fun to listen to. I mean, they both have died and they're gone now, so I enjoy listening to them. And it's the same thing with the reunions, the things that Mike tried to preserve for us. Um, it's fun to watch them and listen to them. Although when you get a group of them together, the stories got countered with something else. No, that's not true. It was this way, or no, it was, you don't remember correctly. He did this. And so you never knew which story to believe, but they all had their different versions of what happened. But it was
I've
fun. It
learned,
was fun to get together.
oh yeah, I've learned over the years that whenever you hear the same story exactly the same, it's likely not true because everybody has a different variation of that
Yeah.
story or a different, they saw it in a
Oh, yeah.
different light, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've actually got a story about the parents of Benjamin Thomas Wilson. We don't know where they're buried. We've never located them. And I met with Miss Faye whenever I was up there visiting you, and we went over to Faye's house.
Say louder.
Yep. And she told me a story about her grandparents, her her great grandparents. And she
Actually, I
said,
think we met her at the nursing home she was in at
yep,
Lake Mallard.
that too. Yep.
Yeah.
And she started telling this story about her great grandparents and how they were buried in a basement cemetery kind of under this church. And, the coffins were glass see through and you could still look through and see the bodies. And
Yeah, I
even
remember
her
that
own
story.
daughters, yeah, her daughters were like, oh, mama's lost her mind. And then I told that story to Glenn in Georgetown, and he said, oh my gosh, he said, I heard the exact same story growing up. He said, I used to get in trouble during vacation Bible school because I'd walk around the church looking for the door to the basement because I wanted to find that. And it was interesting to hear that story because that's two completely different family lines from two different states. So obviously there's some validity to the story. It wasn't just something that somebody was making up to pass along to the kids. It traveled quite a ways,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. Now, who are some of the family members that have had the greatest influence on you growing up? I mean, obviously your mother, but are there any others? And I mean, stories about your mother, but are there others within the family that you look to that kind of took you under their wing and that you carry on some of their traditions and ways that they taught you?
Well, I do try. There's some things that I remember from childhood and living on Old Vanceboro Road that my mother did for Christmas. And I try to do at least one of those things. Like we had, and I think there's a picture of her standing at the kitchen table with a glass of eggnog in her hand, and she's holding it up like she's doing a toast. And so I have glasses similar to what she had. And every year at Christmas time, we all do a toast with our glass of eggnog. But she really loved to decorate for Christmas. She was all about decorating and trying to make the house look really nice for Christmas. And I do. I've that's been instilled in me, and I do enjoy doing that. Um, the only person that I can think of that really influenced the way that I am today is my sister Cookie. Um, we were not such good friends growing up. Of course, she had a lot of responsibility taking care of me and my brother, Chris. Um, my mom and dad moved to Jacksonville during the school year, and she had to take care of us for the remainder of the year by herself at her home on Old Vanceboro Road. And that wasn't very pleasant because I didn't like her being the boss, and I would take off and go where I wanted to on my bike. And my little obedient brother would stay right by her little coattails, and he was her favorite. And so we didn't get along too well then, but after her being married and having a child, and then I got married, and she would leave her daughter, Teresa, at my mom and dad's for the summer. And whenever I would go visit, I would take care of her sometimes because my mom worked all the time. So there was kind of a connection made there. And I can remember as a teenager, probably 13 or 14, going to Cookies and staying the summer so that I could babysit Teresa while both of she and Jack worked. And that was kind of the beginning of a good relationship. But after we both were married and had children, and she would come to visit us and we would go visit them, that's when the relationship really got to be very personal. And um, we cared for each other and loved each other, went places, traveled, a lot of travels together. But she was the most influential person. And a lot of things that she had been through that she um, tried to make her life better because of those experiences or things that I looked at and tried to emulate. So I think probably she was the most influential.
So the story from the trip to Disney World, would that be considered retaliation for your childhood?
Mm, no. Which trip are you talking about? I went to Disneyland and Disney World.
Your blind sister.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, that
yeah.
was Disney World. That was Disney World. Yeah.
So what exactly happened there?
Well, she had gotten some new contacts and they weren't adjusting very well. Her eyes weren't adjusting. And we were at the bus stop one morning waiting for the tram to come and take us over to Disney World. And they were bothering her so badly, she took them out and put on this little pair of specs, these round specs that sunglasses that made her look like a blind person. And when the bus got there, I, of course, hopped on and she was coming behind me. And the sun happened to hit her eye to a point that it caused her not to be able to see. And she couldn't come up the steps on the bus. And I was already almost halfway down the bus. And she yelled out, "Brenda, help me, I can't see." And I stopped and I realized she was talking about her eye. And everybody on the bus, I said, looked at me like I had left this blind person down on the steps of the bus. And I looked at them, they were all glaring at me. And I said, she's not blind, she just can't see. And I turned around and went back down and helped her up the bus. And two of these people on the bus took her by the hand and said, "Can we help you?" And they were trying to take her away from me and seat her with them so that she would get the help she needed. Anyway, I was the scourge of the bus the whole way to Disney World. But when we got there, we did go to the medical center and they, of course, helped her out and got her eye fixed so she could enjoy the rest of the day. But that was that story.
I've always loved that story.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to share? we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But if you have
Can't,
anything,
can't think of anything else except I recall when I was supposed to get married on the 24th of August in 1968. And my brother David and his new wife had come to visit, and it was the week before we were supposed to get married. His wife was expecting their first child, and they were headed for Spain. And my sister and I, the week before, 2 weeks before my wedding, drove to New York, and my brother followed us in a car so that he could drop his car off at the port there to have it shipped to Spain. So when we got back, we found out that they could not stay for the wedding in 2 weeks. So we moved the wedding up a week to the 17th of August so that they could be there. That was a story, everything got chaotic. My mother was called to Texas because her sister was in a car accident and had fractured her neck, and mom had to go to Texas to pick up a cousin and bring her back with her. It was just very chaotic. Everything was going crazy. But in the end, it all worked out. Everything went well. Had some a nice reception and got some good pictures, and we've been married for 57 years. So
now one last thing. What is your best memory of your mother?
I think seeing her happy just about every day from the time I was 5 years old, she would take me on the paper route was her job, and she traveled about 125 miles a day to almost to Greenville, North Carolina, and back to New Bern with her paper route. And occasionally she would drop me off at a farm there for the weekend to visit with the kids on the farm and help out with chores around the farm. And that's where I learned a lot about um, growing things and animals and tobacco. Oh my gosh, tobacco. Um, I hated it, but it was a way for me to make money during when I was a teenager. And I did learn a lot, but she had that paper route for so long, and then she had to move to Jacksonville, and that was the end of that. But she had every job in the world. Good gracious, if you ask her, she could probably tell you that she knew how to run a laundromat. She knew how to run a produce stand. She knew how to sell, take orders, deliver Tupperware. She knew how to, and I think one of the most memorable times was when we really wanted to make some money and there was nothing else for us to do. She would take us from Jacksonville down the road beside the railroad tracks and let us pick up soda bottles because we could get a 2-cent deposit on them. And we would load the trunk of her car up with those bottles and then take them to stores and get the deposit on. They hated to see us coming, I know, because they'd have to count all those bottles to give us our deposit money. And I think the happiest I ever saw her is when she worked in the temple. She served a mission at the Washington, D.C. temple. And I don't remember ever seeing a picture of her while she was serving at that temple that she was not smiling, or hearing a story that her countenance changed. She beamed. It was just wonderful. She enjoyed it so much being in the temple. As a matter of fact, the last temple trip that she had, I had planned for her birthday. And my daughter Karen and I took her to the Washington, D.C. temple. And she was just in heaven there. She was at home. She had been there, lived there, and there were still some people there that she had worked with. I can remember the day that Karen and I were to pick her up at her home in New Bern. we found out that she had been taken to the emergency room. And by the time we traveled from Winston-Salem to New Bern, they had discharged her because she kept tapping her watch and telling them she had somewhere to go. And so we made that trip. And in that trip, after we had done the work that we'd gone there to do, I had left my earrings in the locker in the dressing room and told her to sit right there. She was in a wheelchair. I told her to sit right there and that I would be back in a few minutes. When I got back, she was surrounded by people. I thought something had happened to her, that she had fallen or passed out or tried to do something she shouldn't do. But it was people that she knew, people that were working in the temple that had worked with her, and they had surrounded her. She was in her element. That was the happiest I'd ever seen her. But it was a wonderful trip and we had a good time. Very
The
special experience.
the picture from that trip is one of my favorites. The
Yeah, I have it
picture
on
of
my
it.
wall in my bedroom. Yeah.
Yep. That's always one of my favorites.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
it's not the prettiest thing in the world because the wind was blowing and mine and Karen's hair was sticking out everywhere. I think Mom's was fine because she always kept it so short.
right.
But we made that trip. I asked her what she wanted for her birthday, and that's what she wanted. One more trip to the temple. And she died that June. That was in February, and she died that June.
Right. Well, thank you for sitting down, taking the time with me.
Oh yeah, enjoy
Definitely a
it.
lot of fun. I love hearing your stories. And just so you know, one of the most influential people in my life is you,
Oh my
because you're the
goodness.
one that gave me the assignment to
The
do
what?
this. You're the one that gave me the assignment to do things like this, you know?
Yeah. Well, I was hoping you would accept it. I knew you were right for the assignment, and I was. I pray all the time that those things will be preserved. So this is one way of doing that, and I appreciate it. And thank you so much for doing this for our family.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Oh
So
yeah, family reunion.
that's right. All right,
All
Aunt
right, man.
Brenda.
Love
Thank
you.
you so much. Love you.
Bye bye.